Welcome, everybody, back to the Friar Talk podcast and YouTube channel. For today's episode, we're going to be quickly just talking about Nick Martinez's spring training debut against the Dodgers. So, going to start out, and this is probably going to be maybe a 5 to 8 minute video, pretty quick one today. Tomorrow, we're going to be going over the top 30 prospect list that was dropped by MLB.com, and just going through a bunch of guys. And then later, before the season starts, so probably next week, I guess, we're going to probably do our own top 30 list because we did that last year. Super fun. Get you really familiarized with all the prospects. So we're going to get through all those guys as well. But with all that said, going to be talking about Nick Martinez a little bit. Today was the first time we got to see him pitch as a Padre. And I would say he looks subpar. I think if you look at the box score, you go 3 innings, 1 run, struck out 3. It looks pretty good. But if you're watching the game, I thought his fastball looked good, but he was giving up a lot of hard contact, pretty wild. Changeup was a little bit wild. Curveball, he bounced a couple curveballs, and just kind of all over the place. He walked 2 batters. If you watch the game, Freddie Freeman hit a home run on a 3-0 pitch that was just fastball down the middle. So I didn't because I'm trying to analyze him as he's competing for the fifth starter spot. So when I'm doing that, we've seen Gore, we've seen Paddock, and both of them have looked pretty good. I would say this is subpar. So. And I also add, just because it's subpar, I don't think that's that big of stock down on Nick Martinez or anything like that. But it is something that's kind of interesting to note. So with all that said, Chase, how do you feel about Nick Martinez? And where do you kind of see him in a race against Chris Paddock and Mackenzie Gore for the 5th starter spot?
So I may be a little bit biased because sort of last year towards the end of the season, we saw Paddock somewhat come to normal form. He was being really efficient with pitches. He was going deep into games. And now with Ruben Niebla there, I feel like Chris Paddock can step it up after, everything that happened last year. And if he really establishes that curveball and his changeup is back to normal, we could see, a 3.5 ERA Chris Paddock from the 4 spot. And then with the way Gore's been pitching, I want to see him face a lineup like Martinez did today. And if he outperforms that, I think Nick Martinez might just be the long reliever along with Nabil Crismatt. I mean, if he can be what Nabil Crismatt was last year, carry around the same ERA, that is crucial. Nabil Crismatt was probably the backbone of the entire pitching rotation and bullpen last year. I mean, we are only getting 5 innings out of our guys, and when they were shorter than that, Crismatt would come up and throw 3 to 5 innings and save the rest of the bullpen, and it was crucial. It was huge. And for Nick Martinez, it might be a better position for him to start off like that so that he can get adjusted into MLB talent a little bit more compared to Japan. And when you're only throwing 2 to 3 innings, 4 at most, you're not going to go through a lineup more than one time, and hopefully not more than one time. And that's kind of how you maximize your guys who are adjusting to MLB talent. You don't want them to get seen a whole lot of times until, they are fully adjusted. And then you go, okay, we can stretch them out a little bit more. And from the little bit of things that I saw, the 3-0 count was a fastball down the middle. If you do that in a real game against the Dodgers, you're going to get punished like you did in this spring training game. He walked 2 people in 3 innings. That's not ideal. You usually don't want to see more than a walk in 3 innings. Yeah, Freddie Freeman at 3-0. That was nearly a 3rd walk, but he took it deep. So next game, if he wants to make the 5th man spot, he definitely has got to work on his location a little bit more. His velocity looked fine. He did bounce a couple curveballs. You want to see those usually up in the zone. You want to see a little bit more swing and miss. He did strike out 3 people, which is 1K an inning. But, it's hard to say. I think he might just be fighting for, the long reliever spot along with Nabil Crismatt. I think that's probably the best way you do it. I know he's making a lot of money. I know a lot of people are going to say he's going to make the 5th spot because of it. But with the way Gore's been pitching, like Matt was saying, it's a good problem to have. You have a petition for the 5th starter, and Gore might just force his way onto this roster, which is a good thing. It's a good thing to see that after the last couple seasons that Gore had. It's good to see that adjustment. And like I said, I believe Nick Martinez's best role would probably be as a long reliever.
No, I think there's a lot of fair points that are made there. One thing I will add too is Blake Snell is potentially not going to be starting to begin the year. Mike Clevenger's coming back from Tommy John. Potentially those two guys get piggybacked, and then you'd have your three top starters. And you brought up Gore and Paddock. Well, if they decide to rock with a six-man rotation, then there's Nick Martinez. He can also be your sixth guy. So it kind of depends on how the season starts. I think a lot of it, of how the pitching rotation is going to look initially, depends on if Blake Snell's ready to start. Also depends on whether or not they want to do a 5 or 6-man rotation. I think that if Blake Snell is not ready to go, I think doing a 6-man rotation actually has a ton of benefits, because when he's back, which I don't think it's going to be too long, I think he might initially start pitching, but they're going to slowly stretch him out. That's what it seems like the plan is right now. Still unclear on that. But if they decide to do that, if you have all of these three guys getting a start every week, there you go. That's even more competition, because my thought right now was, and like you said, Chase, I do believe that Nick Martinez is the favorite to get that fifth spot if everyone was healthy. If there was only a fifth spot available in this rotation, I would lean him because of the money. However, I don't know if I think that's the right choice. That's just more of where I think they would go. I haven't seen enough of how Chris Paddock looks under Ruben Niebla. Mackenzie Gore, he's only pitched 5 innings so far. He's looked fantastic. It's been super promising. I'm super pumped about it, but we're not quite sure if that's the best move. And then we look at Nick Martinez, and we just saw tonight. So it's like we haven't seen that much. If we get multiple starts, maybe even 2 each, I think that's when you can even make a decision then. Oh, in these first 2 starts, everyone had a good outing except for Paddock got destroyed one time. And Nick Martinez looks like he's already catching up, and he looked even better in his second start. Then maybe it's like, okay, they're going to go with Paddock because he looked the best, or whatever it is after those starts. But I think that's an interesting way to do it. And maybe 2 of those guys just look too good, or you have to rock with the 6-man rotation, and then Nick Martinez or Chris Paddock or Mackenzie Gore becomes that long reliever, and you have 6 guys in the bullpen and a long reliever. You remember what happened last year? The bullpen got completely burned out. That's a way to help the bullpen a lot if you have 6 starters and another starter that's a long reliever. So going to be really interesting to see how they play it out. And maybe that's too many guys that are like starter types. But I don't know. I think it's hard to tell right now with this rotation. I'll say I think this rotation is really underrated, and we're going to talk about it next week. But I don't know. I think that's one option they could go. So what do you think about kind of how it would affect Nick Martinez if they do go with a 6-man rotation, and let's say Blake Snell isn't healthy to start the year?
I don't think it changes much. I mean, you're going an extra maybe 2, maybe 3 innings, depending on how efficient you are. And it's probably just a good idea, get his arm stretched out for, in case of emergency situations. We saw Nabil come out, okay, this guy's only going 2 innings because he got hurt. Nabil, we need you to go and throw 5, 6 innings out there. You're going to be a starter today. And it's not a bad idea. I mean, having Nick Martinez be a starter at the beginning of the season in a 6-man is not a horrible idea. But it's a pretty good idea if Snell is out. Because then when Snell gets back, you can take, okay, between the 4, 5, and 6, who's pitched the least effectively and who's shown the most promise. And you go, okay, this guy's going to be the 5th starter still. He's showing more promise. You're going to be demoted to the long reliever role, because we saw, maybe the second or third time around in the through the lineup, you started to struggle a little bit more than these 2 guys. That's not a knock on you. We just feel like this role is going to be better for you, and this is going to be better for the team, which I think Nick Martinez's role is going to be exactly like what Nabil Crismatt was last year, especially with all the pitchers and their injury history. We only had one true starter last year, and that was Musgrove. He pitched every game that he could. He came in emergency relief for 5 innings. And outside of that, every other pitcher was hurt. And so having Nick Martinez be a long reliever sort of and a backup starter already in the bullpen, it's a really good thing to have. We saw it last year where we were really affected by it. Having 2 of those guys would really save the bullpen.
Yeah, so super interesting on how this is going to play out. I'm not sure where I'm at with it yet. Chase, I kind of see where you're coming from, and I think that would be a strength that the Padres did not have last year. I mean, starting depth was the thing they lacked the most, and this year, like I said, we're going to probably do a full segment on this. it's a lot better. There are multiple minor leaguers that have ETAs in 2022, and you have 7 guys that are potentially starting in the MLB this year. And that's not counting Adrian Morejon and Dinelson Lamet, who you've tried to have start last year. So, I mean, and those, I don't even expect them to attempt to start those 2. So a lot of guys that are playing a starter role this year, which was just not the case last year. So good to see. And I think if they adopt that route, Chase, I think that you're going to see a lot less strain on the bullpen, because the bullpen was amazing the first half of the year and they fell off horribly because they were so overworked, because there were so many games where it's like, oh, well, this guy went 2-3 innings. All right, bullpen, we need to go 6 or 7. And if you have a guy that can consistently come in and plug that up and like fill up, Nick Martinez comes in and pitches 4 innings, that's huge. And the other thing is, he's a pretty solid arm to do that too. So a lot of times you might get down early in a game. We've seen Fernando and Manny get hot in a couple of games and hit a couple of big bombs, and maybe you end up winning a couple of those games where you kind of have no business winning because you have that guy that can actually, have some run prevention in there that comes in as the long reliever. Because a lot of times it just kind of feels like teams wave the white flag in those situations, but maybe you don't if this is the route that they rock with. But I think with all that said, I think it's going to wrap it up for today's episode. So, excited to see more of Nick Martinez. I'm titling this as Nick Martinez with subpar. That's not to rip him. That's not to be a bad thing, but I just think that's kind of where he was at today. And so, we're going to keep trying to evaluate these guys on how they perform, but super pumped. And either way, I'm very optimistic in how he's going to look. So thank you guys all for listening. And we'll be back tomorrow with more Padres content. We'll be talking about that top 30 prospect list. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you then.